and welcome to the Industry 4.0 Community Podcast, hosted by 4.0 Solutions. I am your host with the most, Walker D. Reynolds. Today, this is a pre-recorded podcast for the summer sabbatical 2023. Today, our guests are Andy Hughes and Jerry Abbey from Plex Manufacturing Execution Systems, which is a recent acquisition of Rockwell Automation. Andy and Jerry, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So a little bit of backstory. So I gave the keynote address at Mass MEP a few weeks ago while I was in Boston. Andy was in the audience. Jerry wasn't in the audience, right? It was just Andy, right?
Right. Just
so Andy was in the audience, and the former lieutenant governor of Massachusetts spoke directly before me. I think he's the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Mass now or something. And he spoke directly before me, and he made a reference to intellectuals and academics and the strength of academics in Massachusetts. And I pivoted my keynote to open with, I want to demonstrate, how poor of a job academics and intellectuals do in conveying concepts and ideas to manufacturers. And so I asked basically three questions that we do ask most organizations anyway. One of those questions, what is digital transformation? Andy happened to be the only person in the audience who raised his hand. He gave an answer. Andy and I spoke after the keynote address, and we said, "Hey, why don't you?" He said, "Hey, I'm with Plex. I'm part of the Plex. I joined 6-7 months ago, and I was post acquisition from Rockwell Automation." And I said, "Dude, why don't we have you on the podcast?" Because Andy's relatively new, he invited Jerry, who's been with Plex for I think 12 years. Correct, Jerry?
A year and a half.
Okay, a year and a half. But you've been. What I'm gonna do? I'll have you guys introduce yourselves, so that way I don't get it mixed up. So we'll start with Jerry. Jerry, tell us a little bit about yourself, what your role is at Plex, and sort of what your background is.
Sure. So I started with Plex during the acquisition. I was in my interview process, and the hiring manager goes to me, "So things are going to be a little bit different than we talked about in the first interview. Rockwell just acquired Plex, and you're going to be part of a larger organization." And to be totally honest, I was absolutely pumped. I came from an organization that was 100 people, and I was looking for growth. And in my time, I've been able to experience a ton of growth. And I think we'll dive into it more later, but I went from product marketing manager to running our competitive win-loss and analyst relations, all within the Plex business. And then a few weeks ago, I moved into running analyst relations, industry analyst relations for all of Rockwell. So it's been a great journey, and really excited to be here for our conversation today.
Excellent. Awesome. And then Andy.
Yeah, so I've been with Plex since December, and it was sort of a natural progression for me. So before this, I was in engineering simulation. And so I worked with engineering teams, covered North America. So not only did we sell software, but we did all the consulting, even had a testing group under my group where we climbed wind turbines and put strain gauges and accelerometers on just about anything you can think of, from locks up at the St. Lawrence, to a shaft that's mixing beer. So to find that, whatever was working and what wasn't working. And then we would merge those two and do simulations from that test data that we got. So we were really involved in digital twins. And so it was really a nice place, an interesting place for me to be, because prior to that, I was in product development for companies like Stanley Tools and Thule, who makes the racks for your bicycle and your kayak. I devised a whole line of products for the contractor, so truck racks and toolboxes. And I always like, working with manufacturing and diving into the engineering side of it. And I've always been known as a marketing and sales guy that gets along with engineers, and they just said that's a rare commodity. So between all of that and the sales experience in the past, it's sort of worked through, and now it makes sense. So I get to work with the whole process from the beginning to the end.
So your guys' backgrounds. So Andy, you said that you're a business development guy who gets along with engineers. By the way, it is very rare. Obviously, engineers generally hate salespeople. It's always like, I don't want to talk to the business development guy. Give me your you're a product engineer. Like, and it's we joke about it in our team all the time. But what are y'all's backgrounds, education wise? Are you combinations of business administration plus some technical background, or is it business admin, or did you go technical and just move over to the business development side? We'll start with Andy.
So I was more on the business side, and just a bachelor's degree, upstate New York. Did a lot of studying overseas, and then worked my way through. So with Stanley Tools, that was probably one of the best opportunities to work from, the initial sales job all the way through to a VP of product development. So
are you an SU guy? I mean, you strike me as like an SU guy. Where'd you go to school?
No, actually, SUNY Oswego.
Oh, you went to Oswego. I have friends who went to Oswego. Yeah.
Oh, you?
So I have my master's is from SUNY, is through the SUNY ecosystem. So I started out at SUNY Cortland doing my graduate work, and then I finished at Empire. So I finished my master's online. And then Gary, or Jerry, I have a brother named Jerry, and it spells the same way as you, and I just called you Gary. And by the way, my brother hates when people do that, and my dad, who's also named Jerry, so I do apologize. Jerry, tell us a little bit more about your background, kind of where you came from prior to coming into your roles.
Cool. I'll try to keep this concise. It's meandering. I graduated and ended up as a Fulbright scholar to Taiwan. I studied English education, literature, and writing, and took this research and teaching experience in Taiwan, taught English, did a bunch of educational research, absolutely loved it, and was thinking I was on a track for being a professor one day, really like in that mindset. But then I'd always wanted to write a book, and I just built a bunch of experiences. So I spent some time writing a book, realized that if I pursued a PhD, went back to school, anything like that, teaching full time, I wouldn't write. And I did odd jobs. So I was traveling around, waitering, bartending. I was in the Hamptons. I was in Fort Lauderdale, catching spring break, just making money that way and having time to write. Then the Great Recession happened. I landed in Philadelphia and started working for my family business, which is plumbing and heating. Most of my family are contractors of some form. And as I go through this, and I will keep it short, all of these experiences really helped me out when I came to Plex, and especially that one, because I come from this academic background, academic thinking, and didn't understand that the mechanical side of the brain is totally different. And I'd argue with my brother while doing pretty much a true apprenticeship, working with him every day, about where the pipes were supposed to go. I was like, that is straight and that's the way it's supposed to go. And he would be like, dude, look around. If they want to put an addition in, if they want to add another utility over here, if they want to break out a room, you need to have a large, long vision of what this space could be and how your decisions are going to impact the changes this homeowner, this business are going to make. And that was such a powerful lesson to understand thinking differently. From there, a series of other experiences, lots of learning, went into another software company for 12 years before I came to Plex and Rockwell, and learned a ton along the way. But I don't want to drag this down with a whole bunch of personal experience.
Wait, when you talk about the academic piece, part of my story, I tell this story about, I was the first person to go to college in my family. I'm adopted, and there were 5 kids in my adopted family, and 3 of them were brothers and sisters, and then 2 of us were brothers, and we were merged together in this adopted family. And I grew up dirt poor. Grew up in a trailer park in upstate New York. I watched, Andy and I are probably relatively close in age. So we saw that if you were probably at SUNY Oswego just as the manufacturing exodus was beginning in the 80s. And, I saw it with my own eyes, like the negative impact of the manufacturing exodus. I mean, literally neighborhoods that were middle class and upper middle class in just 2 or 3 years, blight set in. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, people went from making really, really good income to working at gas stations and on farms. Like when the manufacturers left, there was nothing to fill the vacuum. And So I saw with my own eyes this, like the impact of losing a vibrant manufacturing sector has on the economy, right? And obviously from industry, you move over to service, right? If we look at the progressions of economies, you move more into a service-based economy. We're kind of coming full circle now. Service and industry are merging together, right? This is why we're seeing an explosion in onshoring, right? Because now service is always used to be post-manufacturing, post-creation of goods. Well, now service is part of the creation of the good and the PLM cycle. That is the continuous improvement of the good by collecting data off that good after we get it in the customer's hands. So this is why Industry 4 is so important. The idea that we turn companies into data companies. But one of the things that really stood out to me after I graduated from college, I learned that in college, right? I learned the thing that made everyone, why is it that everyone got poor, you know, and all the stuff, the social stuff we see today is an extension of the decline of the middle class, right? I mean, that's all the stuff we see today in our society is a direct extension of the decline of the middle class, which is why it's important, you know, which is why saving and creating middle class jobs matters to me, right? So I learned in college what actually happened. And then after I graduated, I threw my own graduation party. My father comes, he says, you know, I'm really proud of you. And he pats me on the back and he says, you know, you set the example for your brothers and sisters. He says, but I'm here to tell you nothing you learned in school makes a bit of difference in the real world. He said, you have a foundation that you're going to start a new job on Monday. You have a foundation that your coworkers won't have, but you don't know anything. So on Monday, when you go in, your job is to go in as a learner. You're going to find somebody who's got 30, 35 years of experience. They don't have your education, and you're going to learn everything from them because they know what the problems are. And that was some of the greatest advice my father ever gave me, because I looked at the college educated kids who came out. You know, I graduated, you know, I mean, I had a 4.0 GPA. I full ride all through school. I'm a smart guy, right? I mean, I'm, you know, I run the risk of thinking I'm smarter than everyone else around me all the time. I run that risk. And when I went into manufacturing, I went in thinking I knew nothing because my dad told me to think that way. And it made all the difference. All the other college kids came in thinking they knew what was best, right? They knew, oh, you guys are idiots. You're pedantic. You're whatever. So that is carried over out throughout my entire career. Okay. Let me ask you this, guys. So you guys are both with Plex. You're both relatively new. You have a year and a half. You have 7 months. Have you guys, Plex is a manufacturing execution system. What I'll do is have you guys go ahead and tell the world, okay, what is Plex actually? Okay. And then I'm going to dig a little bit on the manufacturing execution piece because, you know, well, let's start out here. Manufacturing execution system is not a thing. Like if I say MES and you define MES and you put it on a board for customer A, and then you define MES and you put it on a board for customer B, they may mean the same thing. They may not mean the same thing. You know, manufacturing execution is basically the core 4, you know, state downtime tracking, OEE calculation, work order, and scheduling. That's your core 4 MES. And then there's another 100 possible options. Recipe management could be in there, digital quality control, you name it. So, whereas when you say SCADA between customer A and customer B, it's always the same thing, right? I mean, it's always supervisor control and data acquisition. So with that foundation, do you guys want to go ahead and tell us what Plex actually is? It's Plex, manufacturing execution system. It's cloud-based. That's what our audience knows. But what actually is it?
I can jump in and just give a little bit of a history to this. So back in the 90s, you know, when there was a person who was doing operations, because this is what happened in the 90s, there was some IT work that needed to be done. Whoever raised their hand, usually the operations guy, is the guy who became the new IT guy.
That's right.
And so that was happening with a parts manufacturer that was supplying Ford and the other members of the big three. They were not doing well. They were actually hiring helicopters to bring their product to Ford so they did not miss, you know, their delivery time when they got there, so they didn't want to get the fines with that. So it got that bad that the head of operations went to the owner and put in his resignation, and instead of accepting it, he challenged him and he said, I'll give you this amount of time and this much money, you develop a system. And so he laid out a full system, which was the start of Plex ERP.
So this was a tier one. So this was a tier one supplier. Okay, got it.
Right. So developed this, and just to speed this up, they brought their delivery times, up to 98, 99%. Everything started running smoothly because they had the data at all times. They could see where everything was from WIP, working with their suppliers all the way through the process. They knew what was there so they could make good decisions. It got to the point where Ford came back and said, would you come in and teach our other suppliers what you've done so they can start performing as well as you have? So they were doing that, and it became a point like this is probably a better business model than what it was doing before. So they started Plex, and it was initially an ERP system, and an ERP system only, the full ERP. Right. And that continued mostly in the automotive business for quite some time. A couple of decades. And then it got to the point where we wanted to branch out, go into a lot of different industries. And we realized that the issue out there for people wanting to get into the cloud and to get a better hold on their business is not just selling a full ERP system, but to break it out into its components. So you can buy an MES system from Plex. And now you can actually see what's going on through the whole process, from the top floor to the shop floor. You can make good decisions because you've got the data and it's real-time data. We've also got, a quality, a QMS system. But I think we want to focus on MES because even if you have a quality system, it's like holding a laptop next to what you're working on. And if you key in that information, you know exactly what's happening. But when you have the MES, you can put guidelines in there. So if something occurs, something else has to happen. And that worker at that station is not able to do that next thing until he does that first thing. And that's where MES really comes in and adds control. And probably the best part of it is that it's really ERP agnostic. So we can go out and work with any ERP with the MES system that we have.
So Jerry, would you describe Plex as MES centric that extends out to other functions, or would you describe it as ERP centric that extends out to other functions of which MES has the greatest potential? How would you describe that? Or would you describe it some other way?
That's a great question, Walker. And I think it depends who you're talking to, but in general, it's a system that has a great expansive MES and also brings those ERP capabilities for an organization as needed. And just to add on to what Andy said, and one of the things that I work on is our State of Smart Manufacturing report. It's a global report. This year, it collected feedback from 1,353 manufacturers across the 13 largest manufacturing countries. And some of the findings, and they're not dissimilar from other published reports, are around how you manage with the worker situation today.
Right.
And that meaning that baby boomers are retiring. Look at statistics, roughly 10,000 a month. Digital natives are coming in, and organizations are struggling with that balance. How do you capture knowledge retention? How do you bring people on board? How do you attract digital natives when up the street, Wendy's is offering a 401k, paid vacation, free meals, and tuition reimbursement at $21.50 an hour? It's a very difficult market. And one of the biggest things is having an MES, having technology that, as Andy said, you have a screen next to you. You can interpret what's happening. You feel a part of it. And you can say, hey, wherever you are in the organization, especially on the line, if we make this change, it's going to improve our efficiency. Right. And I can show you because I have the data right here and everybody has access to it. And that's what Plex really brings, that liberation of data, unsiloing, connecting people, and helping your organization advance.
Let me ask you that. How old are you, Jerry, if you don't mind me asking? Are you in your 40s yet?
42.
Okay, so we're all three of us are basically in the same generation, right? So I actually, Andy, heard this in my keynote where, turnover rate, when I came out of college as a Gen Xer and you went into manufacturing, okay, the turnover rate for our generation at 1 year was 11%. Okay, so that is 89% kept the job for 1 year. Okay, Today, with Gen Zs and millennials, it is 49% at 6 months, not at 1 year. It is a 51% turnover rate in manufacturing at the 6 month mark, except when you look at Tesla, Volkswagen North America, Amazon, the most advanced. If you look at the top 10 digitally mature companies in the world, the top 10, we have a data set of 1,386, I think now. The top 10, their turnover rate is what we saw as Gen Xers. And the question is why? Are they just better at recruiting? Are they better at retention? I would argue they're not any better at recruiting at all. Okay, they're not any better at recruiting. They're interviewing the same number of Gen Zs and millennials. They're interviewing the same quality of Gen Zs and millennials. The difference is the retention. And the question is why? And the answer is enablement. You call them, I remember what you called the digital, whatever term you use for, what is it?
Digital natives.
Digital natives. What I refer to them as is the employee of the future, the people who were born solving their own problems. You know, and I use this example also in my keynote address. When I was 21 years old, I would call my father 4 times a week to have him help me solve some problem. Dad, how do I fix the faucet? Dad, how do I fix the dryer? Whatever it is. Which wad do I use to reload the shell? I have 3 sons, 24, 19, and 15. The 15-year-old turns 16 next month. Do you know how often my kids ask me for help to solve a problem? Never. I mean, and when I say never, that's not hyperbole. It is they never ask me. So if you think about it, I talk to my dad 4 times a week. They never ask their father to solve a problem. And we work together. We live together. We are together all the time, all day long. It's not like we're on opposite ends of the country. And the answer is, if you're not, and the correlation here is, employment hasn't changed, though. Like manufacturing, if you look at a manufacturing facility today, 90% of manufacturers look exactly the same way they did 30 years ago. Most kids, when young people, they walk into a facility, they feel like they went 50 years into the past. And the question we always ask is, organizations, what tools are you providing this next generation of worker to solve their own problems? That has to be the question you ask. And it's amazing to me how many executives don't have an answer for that. You know, we call it the recruitment and retention of the employee of the future. Jerry, let me ask you this, Jerry Andy. How does Plex, I'm assuming the intimation here is that Plex can help fill that void. It can be the tool that you give to the employee of the future to help solve their own problems and by extension, solve the business's problems. How does Plex do that?
I can throw the first one out here, and I think it's, you said enablement. I would say, empowerment to see what their impact is on the whole. And so when you have all of the data available to everyone, instead of just looking at my machine and looking at the pile of product that I made today, I can see what impact that has on sales. I can see how that's affecting the whole company. And I can look at that same amount of data, 10 different ways as an employee on that machine. And I think that makes you part of a whole, and people stick around more when they're part of a whole, when they have an impact on the business. And with that data too, I think it's easier for people to uptrain and to come into that job a lot quicker, so they feel more productive and they feel better about what they're doing.
What data is that? So just a quick follow-up. When you talk about data, can you give examples? Are we talking OEE? Are we talking status according to plan? Are we talking cycle time? Is there any specific data points you'd like to highlight that Plex provides, or is it just data in general?
Everything you just mentioned is available. So obviously you've got the ability to limit what different people see. Mm-hmm. So the CEO may have a completely different report than just say, the manager for, a certain cell. But yeah, you can see, you would be able to look at the OEE. You're going to be able to see what's happening, for shipments going out. We can create portals to suppliers and out to our customers. And you can even see how it's impacting, the entire process.
Jerry, so you were with Plex before the acquisition. So I want to kind of pivot. Let's talk about the Rockwell acquisition. So with this, I want to drop a couple of caveats. So for the audience, I did prep Andy and Jerry before to let them know sort of, hey, I have a reputation of being very hard on Rockwell. And, there are things about Rockwell I love. I absolutely love, and I use Rockwell's products. It's more how critical I am of connected enterprise. I did let them know, hey, just so you guys know, I do believe I have a responsibility to hold large organizations accountable to serve the market the best they possibly can. Number two, and something that my audience probably doesn't know is that I do get hired by market analysts. So market analysis firms, specifically based out of New York City, will hire me to come in and evaluate acquisition strategies. So this happens quite a bit. It turns out that the Plex acquisition was one of the acquisitions I consulted on. I didn't know until the very end that it was Plex, but I was part of that acquisition. My recommendation, I actually had good things to say about Plex, by the way. And interestingly, in my meeting with the firm, I did talk about, the shift away from ERP and more towards MES, because that's actually where the business takes place. It's not in ERP. The business actually happens on the plant floor. So you want something that sort of merges together events on the plant floor with strategies from the overall business. Jerry was there pre-acquisition. So what I want to talk about is, what was that process like, Jerry? So you had mentioned real quick that, hey, you found out sort of real late that this acquisition was taking place. But what was the acquisition like, number one? And then number two, what was it? What is it like to be part of an acquisition? How does your job change? How many unknowns are there? How effective are organizations at communicating the future, what the future is going to be like, that kind of stuff. But then also, how has the focus at Plex shifted post-acquisition? Right.
Great question, Walker. So to give a little background, I've been in previous acquisitions. My previous company was almost purchased by Excel KKR. That fell through like the day of.
Okay.
Leading up to that, it was a huge strain on resources, super stressful for all employees. It was a really difficult thing on culture and productivity. And then it was later acquired by another organization that was super hands-off and let things flow. This experience with Plex going into Rockwell is the smoothest process I've ever been a part of or ever seen. You asked about uncertainty. There is uncertainty, and there are definitely and have been pieces around where you're feeling like you're building the airplane while you're flying it. That is something that I wanted to be a part of. And I think that's when we go back to thinking about recruiting workers today, that's what people want. They want to take ownership, and that ownership was given to employees to drive the change forward, not a top-down saying, this is what you do because you're part of us.
People don't want to, this generation doesn't want a job. They want a mission. Like, the communication needs to be mission. They don't want a job, they want a mission. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I feel and have felt throughout this very mission-driven. And it's been a collective driving forward to not just adopt a new culture, but to develop a new culture, because we're an organization that is changing and modernizing to meet the needs of today, to address the worker issues of today, to be able to recruit people in and get them passionate about the business at hand. And it has been inspiring. Like I introed, I've shifted roles a few times since joining, and seeing that opportunity, being able to dive into it and seize it, it's absolutely fantastic. And I can't speak for everyone, but I can say that everybody I speak to has a similar passion, interest, and enablement to be able to contribute and drive change in a positive way.
How has Plex changed? So Plex was more or less, it was ERP. The traditionally, if you said Plex, you were really talking about Plex ERP. But from a branding perspective, or not even just branding, I think it's a focus perspective. If you look at Plex at Rockwell, Plex is manufacturing execution. Right? In fact, I don't think you can even find the word ERP anywhere in Rockwell's official marketing when it comes to Plex. Although Plex traditionally was ERP, now it's manufacturing execution. One of the things that we talk about in our community, we have a very large community. I think our total addressable audience unique audience is about 70,000 people per month. So 70 unique individuals view our content every single month. And, you know, we have a huge Discord server, 5,000 people. We have 10,000 people within our IIoT.university. The general consensus in our community is that acquisition is bad. Now, I don't personally believe acquisition is bad. I don't think all acquisition is bad. But the general consensus is when you're evaluating a vendor, say there's a new emerging vendor on the, you know, Inductive Automation comes out with Ignition and they're early on, they're 5 years in. One of the questions you would ask them before you make an investment in their platform is, what is your business strategy? Are you building to sell, or are you building for the long term? It's one of the first questions everyone asks, because acquisition scares people, scares the consumer. What does the acquisition mean? How is it going to change? How is licensing going to change, et cetera? So 2 things for both Andy and Jerry. Number 1, how has Plex changed post Rockwell acquisition? Both good and bad. It would be helpful if we validate good by telling the bad, right? Or we give credence to good when we also acknowledge whatever the negatives were. I would imagine probably the biggest negative is Rockwell's an enormous organization. How do you manage all the moving parts? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure lack of communication has got to be one of them, because there's just too many moving parts. But that's number 1. How has it changed? But number 2, do you want to make the case for acquisition? Specifically, here's how Plex customers benefit from Rockwell acquiring Plex. And we'll start with Andy.
Yeah, so yeah, that's great. I'm seeing an energy and just an overall boost of the mood of the culture of the company at Plex since I've come in. And if you think about it for Plex, if they were an ERP company mostly in the automotive industry in the middle of the country, and we were expanding out with the acquisition of Rockwell, now we can work with all of these companies' alternate locations around the globe because we have support for that. And we can go out and we can work and start business globally, where before we were pretty restricted geographically. We could do it, but now we've really built that out, and we've got the resources.
You're talking about Plex proper. You're talking about Plex specifically.
Talking about Plex proper. Yeah. Okay. Plex proper. So we're able to expand out, and we've got the resources that have merged into the Rockwell business and are training up additional Rockwell people to support Plex, and we're doing that globally. So for us, it's very exciting. So one day I'm working on a deal that's in Connecticut, but the next day I'm working on one in Italy. So it's very good from that point of view. From Rockwell's point of view, they've got a cloud-based system. They're kind of leaping ahead really into 4.0 by the acquisition. So I think that's the real benefit from both.
It's funny if you look at the 2 last biggest partnerships. So let me be an advocate for Rockwell here for just a moment. Which I generally am not. Generally my message is, I love Asset Center. I wish Rockwell would do everything the way they did Factory Talk Asset Center, right? In general, the issue that I have with Rockwell is really more the channel system. Actually, I think it's the philosophy of the connected enterprise, but then it's the channel partner system, because I feel like it's overly rigid. It's not very agile. I think that's generally what my criticism has been. But let me be positive for Rockwell for a second. If you look at the last 2 major partnerships, one which was just a purely strategic partnership with PTC, $1 billion investment, bring in the ThingWorx platform as Factory Talk Innovation Suite, right? That was a huge investment that Rockwell made in PTC. The upside of that investment, I've talked a lot about the downside. Let's talk about the upside. The upside of that investment was that it closed an enormous gap in Rockwell's digital offering. Okay. I mean, through that strategic partnership, it closed an enormous gap, and they were able to catch up basically a decade just through $1 billion investment. The second is this Plex acquisition, and the fact that they've pivoted to MES, because it closed the other glaring gap. Okay. And that is, Factory Talk manufacturing execution system has not traditionally been considered a very solid offer. It's not a best-in-class offering. It hadn't generally been considered a best-in-class. Whereas if what I've looked at with Plex manufacturing execution system, it's very similar to the Tulip approach, the Litmus automation approach. It is very much bleeding edge, right? It is not legacy technology. It is very much bleeding edge approach. And I think it fits very well in the Rockwell ecosystem. The question is, from Rockwell, is Rockwell going to take Connected Enterprise open? That is, are they going to make it easier to play well outside of the Rockwell ecosystem? But we'll table that discussion. All right. So to you, Jerry, the same question that I asked Andy, that is, what make the case for acquisition, but also how have things changed at Plex post-acquisition?
So you said to talk a bit about negativity.
Yes.
I do not have much, but I'll start with that. The uncertainty. So things are not laid out. There is no map for acquisition. There is strategy that we're trying to figure out as we go. And that, honestly, I also look as a positive thing because the open minds are entering the conversations to adapt, get inputs with our customer advisory board, our customers everywhere we can get them, talk to industry analysts, and help really bring that outside in perspective that I'm pretty sure has been difficult at times in the past, but we're trying to lean into hard now. And some of the things that have changed is that Plex was an acquisition for a product, a great product that we're talking about, native to the cloud, entered the cloud in 2001. Like, how many people knew what the cloud was in 2001, let alone launching a product?
Right. Most people don't know that there has not been a full-scale rebuild of Plex from the ground up in order to be cloud, right? Mm-hmm. The approach was cloud-centric from the beginning. Plex was multi-tenant before anyone even knew what multi-tenant was. But go ahead, Jerry. Sorry.
Exactly. So also an acquisition for talent. So our leaders in engineering, in product, in sales, in marketing have moved into leadership roles within Rockwell to help bring this acquisition strategy together. Decades and decades of software experience, best-in-class approach to synthesizing brand, going to market, bringing these pieces together. So you touched on the acquisitions. We also had Fix, which is OEE focused, and Calypso, which is services arm, and being able to tie them together so that we can bring more of a best-in-class offering, and then overlaying Plex MES with FactoryTalk Production Center so that we're meeting the needs of the MES market, where you have configurable cloud or you have on-premise very specific needs, but trying to bring that together so that we have a comprehensive offering and looking for ways that we can tie varied pieces together like Plex MES with a FactoryTalk batch to meet the needs of process manufacturers, and also pull in Calypso to program manage and tie in sustainability goals, have Fix in there, leverage our AI ML capabilities. So there are a lot of pieces that are coming together. There is uncertainty in areas, and there's going to be testing, breaking things, and customers will not always be perfectly happy. But leading with that questioning mentality, putting the right people in the right positions, and really guiding forward with an acknowledgement that there's the best in class out there and that's where we want to be, has really, I think, produced a lot of good, and far more good than anything else.
Well, let me say this to the audience. Normally what I would be asking people on platforms is, how do I get it? How much does it cost? Right? How do I integrate it? I would normally, neither Andy nor Jerry they can answer how do I get it, and they can answer generally how much does it cost. But the integration piece, we agreed beforehand, that's not their expertise. So we're not going to talk about we could talk about what the onboarding experience is, I guess, but we can't talk about, how do you connect to equipment? How do you transform data? How do you access that data? Let's say Plex is calculating overall equipment effectiveness. How do I access that externally? We've agreed to stay away from those discussions because that isn't their domain expertise. Okay, so I'm not avoiding the question altogether. It's just that's not the topic of this discussion for the audience. Okay, so because I think the audience is generally accustomed to me asking those questions. The unique offering, So this is ultimately the question. I want to talk a little bit about landing and expand and stuff. So I did try to go, and part of the acquisition, here's an example of the bump in the road with acquisition. Rockwell has been, I don't know if most people know this, but Rockwell has moved to a software subscription portal system. That didn't used to be the case. Like Rockwell, you would generally have to go through a channel partner to do anything with software. You don't have to do that. If you have a Rockwell login, there's many pieces of software that Rockwell offers that you can just go ahead and you can use the software, download the software, buy the software, zero touch on their portal. Plex is not there on the portal yet. So right now, if I wanted to try Plex, right, for example, how do I do that? I mean, do I have to call a channel partner? What does that onboarding process look like, especially for somebody who's only considering using Plex for, say, a proof of concept, right? And then the follow-up to that is, let's talk about the differentiators of Plex manufacturing execution so that we can do an apples to apples comparison. So either of you can answer, how do we onboard? How do I even get started?
Well, you can call me. And
okay. So Andy, let's say I've called you and I say, Andy, I've got a demo board over here that's running a simulated manufacturing process. And I want to use Plex manufacturing execution to build a simulated manufacturing environment using this test board I've got over here. How would we do that? Is that possible?
I will disappoint you in the short run and make you much more pleased in the long run, because what we're going to do is go through a process, and in the first meeting is probably going to be 3 hours of discovery questions of, what is the pain? And you can say all our processes are manual. We want to go in and have a digitized process, and I'll say, that's great. Why? And just keep digging in and find out what the real issues are. So if there's nothing to solve, or possibly there's some processes that we may not be the best suited for, we may be right, we may not be right. We're going to walk through that before we both put a lot of energy into it and make sure that we're a very good fit for you. And you can find out exactly everything that we're going to do.
I just want to look at here's the most common pain point. Our strategy is generally, what do you think your problem is when we're talking to a client? What do you think your problem is? And then based on my expertise, what is a problem you have you're not aware of? And we try to solve both in the same infrastructure, right? So in generally what they say their problem is, I don't have insight into current state. I want to be able to monitor my assets. I don't have insight into what my actual downtime is. I don't have an insight into efficiency. I also don't have insight into what I'm running when. Like, I want to see which work orders are running on which machines at which time. So let's say that those generic problems are the problems I have, and I want to do that. Maybe I want to do it in my facility that's only got 16 assets on the floor. What is the onboarding? And we've had that discussion. I'm assuming Plex would be a good fit for a facility that's got 16 assets who wants to look at current state. What would it look like? What would that? You're going to onboard me somehow, and eventually we're going to get access to the software. And what's that going to be like?
All right. So we are going to go through a solution process to make sure that we're the best fit, and we're going to do a discovery, and we're going to do a demo to walk you through exactly what it's going to look like. We're going to be looking at an implementation program. We're going to do a discovery and a workshop on that, on what the time is going to take and what type of involvement we're going to have from your side, and do we have executive buy-in to make sure that we can pull these people to help and assist along the way. What we want to do is train you. So if you have multiple facilities, we can come in and we can walk you through the first one, but then you're trained up and you can do it, on your other locations on your own to save a lot of money. We'll be there to support that, but we want to try to help in any way we can. We also probably do a whole value workshop to help give you the information to go to your executive team, to understand what the real savings are and to identify a lot of areas that you probably haven't identified yourself that you're missing out on. That you could be doing that much better. So once we have those agreements in place, we will lay out, just say for MES, maybe it's a 5 to 6 month process of how we will walk through your plant and how we will implement the whole program.
Jerry, what are the differentiators of Plex? If I, in the MES space, you've got cloud-based solutions, you've got Tulip out there, you've got, there's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of solutions out there right now. Why pick Plex manufacturing execution over anything else? Even one of Rockwell's PTC partners, one of Rockwell's partners has a cloud-based manufacturing execution solution that I would argue is not fully comprehensive, but it is MES. It'll do the core 4. How do you differentiate? How do I decide to go with Plex over enter in, other cloud-based competitor?
Great question. So a couple of keys that we've touched on, that native cloud environment. We've always been in the cloud. Nothing is force fit. Most of our competitors are a bit force fit. And beyond that, security. Because we were in the cloud so early, we've always focused on security, being as secure as possible. If you look at stats out there, manufacturing is at the top or near the top of ransomware attacks, malware attacks. Manufacturers can't afford those interruptions when you're thinking about tight margins and downtime. And you need a system that is going to instill confidence and mitigate risk for your organization. So those are two top of mind ones, but there's also other differentiators, like some of the things Andy was touching on. The way we come in and build out a discovery session, we use your data in demos. We have solution engineers with decades of experience in industry that go and research your organization. So when they walk in, they're picking out different areas where we might be able to help immediately. They're asking hyper-specific questions about functionality and where you might be needing to drive outcomes. And that team is really good at digging in and understanding, like Walker, like you said, yeah, you're telling me what the problems are, but what are the problems that you're not seeing? And how do we get those stakeholders in this room so that we're not fitting in for one small piece? We're addressing your overall need because that's what you need. And that's what any organization out there should be doing if they're coming in to offer you a solution. And I could go on all day, but the last one that's really top of mind is the ability to be a one-stop shop and grow with your organization. Now that we're part of Rockwell, we have 120 years of history behind us. We expect to have 120 or more ahead. And we are building that out now to adapt for the future. And we are going to bring it to your organization because we don't want you to just buy our solution. We want you to grow. We want you to grow profitably. And we want you to grow profitably from our support. And that comes out of tying together software, hardware, services, and a strategic partner ecosystem so that if we're not perfectly fit for a part of something you need, we're bringing that strategic partner in that we already work with and have the integrations together, the APIs that are going to make it work, and tie it together so that you're dealing with one unified, focused team. I was at a Gartner conference 2 weeks ago, and they were talking about how there's 500,000 technology providers out there, another 11,000 new ones this year. With that kind of environment to go out and buy a technology for your organization when you're having a hard time even identifying the core problem, it can be overwhelming. And we're trying to be that organization that you can come to, ask the questions, have the guidance, and build and grow and be a partnership together.
So Gartner, we'll talk about. I'm also very, very hard on Gartner. So I own many companies. So I do have insight. Gartner tries to get me to pay to get my companies listed in their stuff too, right? And, when I told my community, they basically sent me the thing. It cost you, whatever, 250,000 will get you in this, in this group or whatever. And when I told our community, I said, Gartner does good, right? There's a huge investment and there's a lot of research that Gartner does that's good, but it's not all good. Our community, when you say Gartner, I think in general, when you say Gartner in a boardroom, people's eyes perk up and they're like, that seems valid and legitimate. Within our community, it's much more, the approach is definitely skeptical. It is, I'm going to take what Gartner says with a grain of salt. It's like IoT analytics. I'm going to take what IoT analytics says with a grain of salt, because anything that's, I don't want to say it's fully pay per play because it's for play, because it's not. But there are real questions about whether or not Gartner points people in the right direction. There are platforms in their Magic Quadrants that belong there, and there are platforms that don't belong there by any objective measure. You could, not subjective, any objective standard, you could say, yeah, this is ridiculous. These three here do not belong here. Clearly there was, and I have to say that, by the way, if I didn't say it, if you brought up Gartner and I didn't say that, I would get absolutely hammered in the comments by my community. So let me ask you guys this question. I want to ask Andy this. So when you sat for the whole keynote address, right? And I'm a huge fan of conflict theory. I'm a pure believer in conflict theory. Get people emotional, right? Figure out who gets pissed off at you and filter them out, right? I said a third of you in here are probably going to hate me, think I'm a dick. And I want to know who those people are so I don't invest any time in that third, right? And then the 2/3 that it resonates, I want to invest my time. I'm a huge fan of conflict theory. What was your takeaway from that keynote? You sat through the whole thing. Obviously, there aren't a lot of keynote, most people don't give their addresses that way. I recognize that. What was your primary takeaway from the keynote? Was there anything that you learned that stood out? Was there anything that you wish I had covered that I did not? Obviously, you agreed to come on the podcast, so hopefully it resonated relatively well. But what was your takeaway from that keynote for those who didn't get a chance to attend it?
So I walked away with everything that I sort of wanted to walk away from. But what really shocked me, I guess, Walker, is that people are so far behind in the goal towards 4.0. There is a desire. Everybody says they want to. No one's taking action to get there. And the more questions you ask, the further back you find them. You were talking earlier about manufacturing hasn't changed. And I think that was proof that manufacturing hasn't changed. You were looking for their digital strategy. No one in the room could say what their plan was. So I think there's a lot of companies out there that need help, and they need to be pushed, because if they don't, they're not going to be here for very long. Because
here was a point, something I wanted to follow up on that real quick, and I'll let you finish. I didn't mean to cut you off, but there's been a lot of announcements over the last couple of months, right? Ford, General Motors, Volvo, BMW, you name it. Josh knows all of them. It's a half dozen companies now, have all announced in the last 8 weeks that they are joining Tesla's supercharger network. Okay.
Right.
And that they're moving to the NACS standard for their electric vehicles. Okay. I think the average manufacturer, the one that doesn't have a digital strategy, who doesn't understand the impact of digital, looks at that and doesn't think that those announcements are big deals. Okay. Right. I look at that and I say, holy shit, these are such huge announcements. Here's why. In order for you to charge your vehicle through Tesla's supercharger network, you have to be onboarded in Tesla's digital ecosystem. So if you are a Ford customer, in order for you to charge your vehicle on a Tesla supercharger, you are going to be an entry in Tesla's digital ecosystem. The idea that Ford, General Motors, now Volvo, who just announced it, would openly hand over all their clients, all their electric vehicle customers to a competitor, okay, is mind-blowing. It's literally the equivalent of Rockwell giving their CRM to Schneider. Like, imagine you did, that's what those announcements mean. Because Tesla is a fully digital company. Like, there's no abstraction. When you pull your vehicle up, like, I don't think most people understand, it's not just electricity going out in that charging cable. It isn't just electricity. Like, these are companies that are literally saying, we are handing over our electric vehicle customers to Tesla. That's literally what these announcements mean. It's mind-boggling. And the manufacturer who's not digital can't see it. Right? They don't, all they see it as is, oh wait, I'm going to pull a car up, I'm going to plug it in, and there's going to be no connection. Like, no, every one of those customers will now be listed inside of Tesla Warp. Mm-hmm. Literally every single client, their payment, their travel habits, everything. It's mind blowing. Jerry, to Andy's point here, he talked about, he was surprised. I actually just shot a podcast yesterday with this guy named Tom Norbert, who is the director of digital transformation for a really large Swedish company. I think, 120 manufacturing sites globally. They're in the polymer business. And Tom, one of the things that I said in the keynote was that, 3 years ago, if you were within the 2 standard deviations below the mean on digital maturity, you still had a chance to catch up. But in this keynote address, I said, because of the advent of the 5th industrial revolution with ChatGPT last fall, now if you're in the bottom half, there's no chance for you. Now, that doesn't mean in absolute terms you couldn't possibly catch up, but the amount of money you would have to invest to catch up is going to outweigh the benefit. So you have all these companies that are in the bottom half of digital maturity who are literally either going to be going bankrupt or they're going to get acquired. We're going to see an explosion in M&A. I mean, absolute explosion. To Andy's point, do you agree that, yes, there are lots and lots of manufacturers out there who they're still oblivious, no strategy, no idea. They just know the buzzword and that's it, number one. And number two, what should those companies do? Let's say you're one of those companies. What do you do? What is step number one in your perspective?
It's a huge problem. And I think step number one is just trying to get educated and take a move forward. And there's so many different opportunities to move forward out there. And that report I mentioned earlier, our State of Smart Manufacturing report, it's conducted by a third party. It's unbiased. We are not influencing the results in any way. Just going back to your Gardner comment. So this is totally separate. It talks about where manufacturers are feeling and focuses in on how they're feeling behind the competition because of where they are in their technology adoption. So just validating everything we're talking about. But then it goes on and identifies technology as the way forward. So manufacturers are acknowledging they feel behind. They're acknowledging that technology is the way forward. And I think those are really good data points for people being open to change. And then there are other data points in here where we're seeing manufacturers actually move forward. They're looking at a modular strategy that is a low drain on resources, low drain on budget. So they're able to take incremental investments,
there you go,
not have to absorb too many people's time, and start with like production monitoring or a quality management system or asset performance management, just something that can get deployed quickly and help you build that ROI and payback so that you can build and take some time for your digital transformation, which is such an overused word, like business transformation, your digitization, however you want to call it. Don't let us containerize you in something, all you listeners, but just moving forward in digital so that you are showing investment in your company, which has so many benefits, especially going back to attracting the next generation of workers who want to see a screen, an investment in technology, something where they can be a part of the process, where data is accessible, things are unsiloed, and you can move forward.
To your point on the buzzwords, here's some advice, totally separate from this discussion, but this is what I encourage clients and a member of our community, the folks who are at IIoT.University, all the people who we talk to. They'll say, how do I weed out, there's a lot of people out there who are good talkers. Like, how do I know who to listen to? Right. I say, before you ever speak, you should ask yourself 4 questions. Number 1, why should anyone listen to me? What am I going to say? What is the audience going to hear? What are they going to say is most valuable? By the way, 2 and 3, what I'm going to say and what people hear are not always the same thing. I may say something and someone hears something different. But I say this, whenever someone uses a buzzword, stop them and ask them to define it. So when someone says digital transformation, say, what is it? What is, from your perspective, what is it? What is IIoT? What is Industry 4.0? What do these things mean? And the reason why is because you'll know real quick whether they're using a buzzword. They just Googled terms that they want to make sure they drop, in their conversation, or whether they actually know. Digital transformation is really simple. It's the process of going from an organization that is automated industrial processes, that is using PLCs and computers to automate out, to engineer out safety and engineer in efficiency in your process. Industry 4.0, digital transformation is going towards Industry 4.0, where we're automating business decisions. This is where MES comes in. How do I optimize the order in which I run things? How do I optimize the schedule? How do I decide which lots to use to produce which work in progress or finished good? Those are business decisions that we're trying to automate and have human beings evaluate from software. That's what digital transformation is. It's that journey of becoming so mature that I'm no longer carrying a paper traveler down my production line. What I'm doing is I'm accessing a digital infrastructure that is giving me feedback about the events that we've been consuming, right? That's the fundamental difference, right? Let me ask you guys this one last question, and then we'll take it home. Has Rockwell Automation, so you guys are new to Rockwell, you're Plex folks who have been brought into the Rockwell ecosystem. Rockwell generally, in the past, when it came to digital transformation, they generally took a more legacy approach, which was you would do like a roadmap up front. That roadmap, that fact-finding roadmap may take 6 months and cost whatever, $100,000, $250,000, $500,000. And then they would basically give you a list of use cases, and you would see ROI, you'd start collecting data on ROI 3 years from now, 4 years from now. But what you just talked about, Jerry, is not that approach. You talked about the approach we tell people to do, which is iterative, small chunks, short sprints. You should be yielding value from your digital transformation initiative, measurable value every 4 to 6 weeks, give or take. Solve a new problem every 4 to 6 weeks. You talked about this iterative approach. Yeah, do you feel comfortable saying that Rockwell proper has adopted that strategy, or that's a focus now, is the iterative approach to solving problems, but just using Rockwell solutions? Is that, because that would be groundbreaking news, by the way, if that were the case? I mean, is that where Rockwell's mindset is at?
Yes, like my opinion, 100%, because all the conversations I'm in, this research report is a Rockwell Automation branded report that is out in the world, and we were using that for
where can people get that? Where can people get that report?
Right on RockwellAutomation.com. You see it right on the homepage, front and center. The 2023 State of Smart Manufacturing report.
We'll put a link. We'll put a link in the description down below. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify or any of the podcast platforms, you can go to YouTube, look in the description, and the link to that report will be in the description. Sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, great report. Lots of awesome data, and
it is third party. It is third party, so it is an unbiased analysis, because this is one of my biggest complaints with Gartner. Gartner will cook the results by, and I know that you guys are affiliated with Gartner, so obviously you don't have to comment on this. But from my personal opinion, it's very easy. Gartner cooks the results by pre-selecting. They use selection bias in who they query in order to get the outcomes they're looking for in the result. That's what they do. But the best way to prevent that is to use a third-party strategy where the bias can't be incorporated by the surveyor, because the surveyor doesn't know who doesn't have the bias themselves on selection of the respondents, right? So you're saying this is a third-party analysis that the report was done on.
Correct. Third party collected all of the information.
Perfect.
We did help create the questions, but we were not involved in the collection process. Right.
You had no say in who was selected to respond. That came from a separate group.
Correct.
Oh, then I mean that's the way it needs to be done. All right. So with that, Andy and Jerry, any parting thoughts? So you guys represent Plex. If people want to know more about Plex, obviously reach out to Andy, but you can go look at Plex Manufacturing Execution System on Rockwell's website. Any other parting thoughts for you guys? Anything else you want to tell our audience?
I guess I would say that I was excited to come here because this gives an opportunity for manufacturers to sort of future-proof their business. So that's what really gets me out of bed in the morning. I do think, just to talk about what Jerry was just going on about, that we have taken the Plex upper management and they have taken over for Rockwell on the software side. So just to confirm that we're taking the methodology from Plex and bringing that into Rockwell. So that's exciting.
Okay, awesome. And Jerry?
It's been awesome to be here, and part of what we already touched on, just being able to question our assumptions. I love this conversation for digging into the things we're doing and really think about them, and think about our audience, and think about how everything we're doing impacts them, and how, I don't know, these are just great discussions to have and engage. So I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, I've been hyper-focused recently on, we've engaged with SAP, and I did a podcast with SAP's Digital Manufacturing Cloud, the product owner for Digital Manufacturing Cloud. We just recently did one with Schneider. We brought in Mark Pittout from Schneider. We talked about Schneider, Aviva, OSI Pi, and very similar to what Rockwell is doing, where absorbing Plex leadership into the software to have, so Plex philosophy has more of an impact on the direction at Rockwell. Schneider Electric did a very similar thing with Schneider, Aviva, and OSI Pi. In fact, we talked in detail about that change. I'm engaging more. This year I've had 3 of the big players. Siemens is next on the podcast. Generally we've invited people, but no one's ever come. I mean, no one wants to take the heat, right? I mean, when I've said, hey, Rockwell executive, come here, I want you to talk about your channel program. Let's talk about these things so we can kind of get it fixed. I'm really focused on, I do believe, I don't even just believe, I know that the future of manufacturing, and by the future, I mean between now and 2030, over the next 6 years, we will see an explosion of interconnectedness in the digital supply chain. I mean, we already have clients who are literally links in the same supply chain, who are connected together, not through just dashboards, but the raw data off of processes are being shared in real time between links in the supply chain. And we will see more and more of that between now and 2030, right? And a lot of the questions I've been asking the big players is, what is your strategy to make that a reality, right? That was part of what this discussion was about. My thoughts on Plex, I'm very intrigued to see where this goes. I really am. And I don't see any reason not to give it a spin. What I would say is this. I think it's absolutely critical in the software space and industry to have a land and expand model. That is, to have a strategy to put software in the hands of users with zero touch. No one has to talk to someone in the channel. No one's got to talk to a business development person. If your software is so complicated that I can't onboard myself to 10 to 15% so that I can navigate through it, it's too complicated. Why? Because there is no week-long training program for an app on my iPhone. There is no onboarding process for an app on my iPhone. And if what you want to do is recruit and retain the employee of the future, you have to follow the model that they're accustomed to, right? And I would, if we had more time, I would ask about that land and expand model. But what I'd like to do is leave it with this. Andy and Jerry, very grateful that you guys were willing to come on the podcast. I'd actually love to do it again. If you guys would be willing to do it again, I'd love to do it if you'd be willing to bring a product engineer or one of your services, someone in your services group on with you, and we could have a more comprehensive conversation about post-assessment onboarding. So I'm going to be, what does that journey look like after the assessment? We've identified the problems. We now know Plex is right for me. We're right for one another. What does that process look like? What is a typical 6 to 12 month journey look like? And have some discussions about the nuts and bolts. If you guys are willing to do that, I'd love to do that and do it this summer.
Would be more than willing to do that.
All right. Awesome.
And quickly, Walker, I just want to say I did a lot of research by watching your podcasts, and I learned a lot, and everything seems to be spot on. So I appreciate it. Just I did it for myself, but I did learn a lot. So
hey,
thanks.
Andy, where are you? Where are you? You're in the Northeast, obviously. Are you in Connecticut? You said.
I'm in Connecticut, up in the Northwestern.
And Gary, you're Where are you?
I'm in Rhode Island.
You're in Rhode Island. Okay. I mean, you guys have the Northeast summer look in the windows behind you. So I mean, growing up in upstate New York, I say to people all the time, there's no better place on the planet than the Northeastern United States in the summertime. It sucks in the winter, but in the summer, there's nothing better. So you're making my heart swell by looking at those trees because we don't have those here in Dallas at this time of year. Right. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us. Those of you like, subscribe, comment down below, include the questions you'd want me to ask in a follow-up podcast with these guys, especially around the onboarding section of it. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
Great. Walker.